Our speaker for today is a preacher, writer, and bivocational youth missionary. He is part of the core team of Feast Youth Mega Manila. He is a member of the Bible Nerds, Brother Bo's small team of researchers for the Feast. He is a mentor at CFA Freedom, a progressive homeschooling program for creative high schoolers under Catholic Filipino Academy. And he hosts a podcast called Not So Secular. Yan. So again, nasa Spotify up. After ng talk niya, kinig tayo doon sa kanyang podcast. And this podcast is all about exploring the sacred in the seemingly secular. Di ba? Ang ganda. Available in your favorite podcast platform. So again, let's give a warm Feast Conference welcome and clap to Brother Mon Reyes.
Good afternoon. Ayan, pwede pakitig din ang katabi at pakisabi, buti na lang nandito ka. Hindi pa tapos, pakidugtungan. Kasi it's not the same without you. Right. It's truly not the same without you. Yes, and I'm really glad that we're here together, that we're having this the second class of our Bible Lab. Sino dito yung mga nandito rin nung first class kanina? Ayan, marami-rami. That's good. That's good. So, hello, my name is Mon. Can I get a hi, Brother Mon? Yeah, it's so good to be here with you. It's so good to see you. Just a little bit about myself before we begin. I am a happily married man. My wife is here. Ayan. We've been married for almost 3 years na. 3 years January. And so please pray for our young family. Aside from that, some of the things that were mentioned earlier, I'm a part of the Bible Nerds. Ayan. So that's the book that we wrote together. And for years now, we've been working with Brother Bo behind the scenes to help in researching for the talks that we hear every Sunday at the feast. So for those of you who attend the feast every Sunday, medyo naririnig nyo yung iba sa mga sinusulat namin or yung iba sa mga ginagawa namin, no? And that's part of the heart behind this class, this lab, right? Because we want to dedicate some time together to talk about the scriptures, to talk about the Bible. Yes? And so, the second class of the Bible Lab is called What's the Drama in Joseph's Saga? Can everybody say, drama? Yan. So, magdadrama tayo ngayong hapon. And, parang 17 lang, no? And, yung mga tumawa, alam na. Right. I'm gonna need your help dahil tayo ngayon, kakatapos lang mag-lunch. Siesta time, di ba? Alam nating madaling antukin sa ganitong oras. So I'm gonna invite you to listen in, lean in, talagang focus on what we're gonna talk about today because I believe that this time that we have right now, we wanna make it full, right? That God is going to speak to us in this time that we have right now today. Yes? Right. So, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We're going to have a Bible study. So we want to explore how to read biblical narrative. And then, the way we're going to do that is we're going to take a look at the story of Joseph. I have to tell you, nung nag-start yung sign-ups for this class, isa sa mga iniisip ko is madidistinguish kaya ng mga tao kung sinong Joseph yung pag-uusapan natin. Kasi may Joseph sa New Testament. You might be familiar with him, di ba? The spouse of Mary, the father of Jesus. Pero meron ding Joseph sa Old Testament. He is also known as Joseph the Dreamer. Right? And it would be so sad if many of you came here thinking na makakarinig ako ng message about Joseph, the spouse of Mary. Alam niyo na kung sinong Joseph. Okay. We are going to talk about the first Joseph, right? The Joseph of the Old Testament. But, tingnan natin, baka sa dulo, magkaroon tayo ng second Joseph. Let's see. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a quick Bible study, okay, in a kind of a classroom set up. And I want to start with this question, okay? Think about this. What has been your experience of reading scripture like? how is it for you? If you were to look back to the times when you decided to read scripture, baka Holy Week nung time na yun. Tapos, syempre, kakagaling lang natin sa recollection, sa retreat, or nanood tayo ng Passion of the Christ. Tapos, oh my gosh, I'm so inspired. I want to start reading the Bible. And then you open the Bible. Syempre, saan tayo magsisimula? Simula tayo sa Genesis. Yan. Doon din tayo nagtapos, sa Genesis. We understand that the Bible is not an easy book to read, right? Benny talked about this during our first class earlier, that we're just expected to read the Bible, but we're not really taught how. It's just do it. Go ahead and do it. Okay? Kailangan mong gawin yan. This is good for your faith, and so do it. And so part of the reason why we're doing this is we want to give you the necessary tools. Can everybody say tools? In order to read the Bible better. In order to pray through the Bible better, which is more important. Whenever I lead a Bible study group, one of the first things that I tell them, usually during our introduction, is this, is that my goal for you is not to read the Bible so that you wouldn't have to, but to equip you with the necessary tools so that you can engage with it better yourself. Because that's important. Right? Of course, this is not something that we do in isolation. Right? Benny also talked about this. This is not something that we do just by ourselves. There's a reason why we have a church. There's a reason why we're a part of a community. But at the same time, this is something that we are all involved in. It's a community thing, but it's also a personal thing. Can everybody say personal? So personalan tayo dito. Right? It cannot be any other way. And so, I want to begin, as we unpack these tools, very simple lang naman yung ibibigay kong tool for today. I want to begin this with this truth. Okay, a truth that oftentimes we don't realize is that the Bible is a profound work of ancient literature. Oftentimes we think of the Bible as a religious book, and it is. We think of the Bible as a church book, and it is. We think of the Bible as a devotional book, and it can be. But we also need to understand that at the same time, the Bible is a work of ancient literature. I want to ask you this. When was the last time that you picked up a book that was around 2,000 to 3,000 years old? When was the last time you read something like the Iliad? Yeah. Something more recent, just a couple centuries ago, which is Dante's Inferno. Or just a few decades ago, Noli Me Tangere. Yeah. Or Florante at Laura. Right? Madali bang basahin ang Florante at Laura? Hindi. Yung Florante at Laura, Tagalog na yun. Okay, mahirap pa rin siyang basahin. Why? Because it was written a long time ago. And it's a specific form of literature. It makes use of certain styles, writing styles, a system of putting together ideas, of storytelling, na yung iba doon, hindi na natin ginagamit masyado ngayon. And so even though it was written in the same language that we speak today, sometimes we have a trouble understanding it or drawing from it. What more, a book, again, that was written 2,000 years ago, New Testament, Old Testament even earlier, 3,000 years ago, if not more. And it was not written in Filipino. And it was not written in English. Hindi English ang Bible. It was written in Hebrew. It was written in Greek. It was written in Aramaic. Languages that we don't even know today. Ngayon, ang alam ko lang, Irishaymase. At wala sa Bible yun. My goodness. Right? So we want to understand, okay? We want to translate. We want to draw from this work, okay? Profound work of ancient literature, because if we can experience it in the way that the authors wrote it, intended for it to be experienced, then we can draw more from it. And the more we can draw from it, the more we can also see Jesus, which is the goal. The goal of immersing ourselves into the scriptures is for us to get to know Jesus. Not just study about Jesus, but to know Jesus. And so these tools that we want to give you, want to equip you with, these are tools that are meant to at least tear down some of the fences, some of the boundaries, some of the walls that are keeping us from experiencing this wholly. Are you ready? Nice. Good. Kasi kung sinabi nyo no, hindi ko alam na gagawin ko, di ba? And so, I want to start with this, okay? The tool that we're gonna focus on for this class, it's for us to pay attention to the patterns and parallels. Can everybody say patterns and parallels? Patterns and parallels. One of the literary tools that the biblical authors used, and used a lot, okay, is they would use patterns and parallels in their stories, in their narratives. Yun ang focus natin for this class, right? They use patterns and parallels. In the same manner na pag pumasok tayo sa bookstore, di ba, may iba't ibang sections. Merong fiction, non-fiction. Pagpunta mo sa non-fiction, may iba-ibang sections. May autobiography, may cookbook, may magazine. Punta ka sa fiction, merong young adult novels, merong so on and so forth, comics. In the same way, na iba yung expectation natin at pagbasa natin sa isang cookbook compared to something like True Philippine Ghost Stories. Sana magkaiba yung basa natin doon, no? Hindi ko alam kung ano niluluto niyo. In the same way that we approach these very different books in very different ways, in the same manner we want to approach the scriptures, the Bible, also in the way that it was intended to be approached, right? And part of that is understanding the way it was written. Ano ba yung genre niya? Okay? At ano ba yung mga commonly ginagamit ng mga authors for them to communicate better what they're trying to say. And for us to kind of understand better how to do this, how to detect patterns and parallels, I want to draw from an example na baka magustuhan nyo. Sana magustuhan nyo, no? Sino dito ang mga fans ng Star Wars? Can I see a raise of hands? Ay, ilan lang. Shucks, kailangan ko magpalit. Okay, bear with me. Napanood at least yung Star Wars. Okay, I'm referring to the George Lucas Star Wars, right? Yung mga Disney Star Wars, hindi ko na masyado napanood, so I cannot comment on that. And I prefer not to. But I'm referring to the George Lucas Star Wars, episodes 4, 5, 6, and then 1, 2, 3. The story of Luke Skywalker and the story of Anakin Skywalker. Okay? And then, let's do this activity, okay? It's called Guess the Star Wars Movie. So, based on the description, I want you to guess what episode I'm referring to. Here's the first one. So, young Skywalker leaves his family in Tatooine to be trained as a Jedi. In the end, young Skywalker wins the victory by blowing up the enemy space station. Sadly, in the course of their journey, the superior Jedi Master is slain by the enemy Sith Lord in front of his apprentice. And the film ends with a grand awarding ceremony. Anong episode to?
Phantom Menace Episode 1.
Phantom Menace Episode 1. Yes?
Rogue One.
Rogue One? No, hindi kasama yun. Episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1? Exactly. It's both 1 and 4. You can use the same description to refer to both 1 and... Nag-iba lang. Young Skywalker is Luke instead of Anakin. Yung namatay na Jedi Master is either Obi-Wan or Qui-Gon Jinn. Yung sinira na space station is either the droid central station na nasa space, or the Death Star. But it's the same. It's the same. Next. Okay, guess the Star Wars movie. 2 male leads are separated in the course of this film. So, magpartner sila, nag-iwalay sila, dalawang guys. One of them takes on a journey of discovery, while the other experiences romance. Unfortunately, they are betrayed by a once trusted friend and turned over to the enemy. In the end, they are unable to defeat the Sith, and young Skywalker loses his hand in the process. Which movie is this? Ayan, may nakita ko. 2. But it's also 5. It's also 5. Luke and Anakin, putol kamay. Right? Sino yung nag-betray sa 5? Si Lando. Sino yung nag-betray sa 2? Si Dooku. Right? One of them takes on a journey of discovery. That's Luke. Okay? While the other experiences romance. Han Solo. While sa episode 2, journey of discovery, Obi-Wan experiences romance. Anakin. It's the same. Last one. Sure, alam niyo na to. Dalawa na lang yung natitirang options, di ba? The Emperor finally reveals himself. Third part. Bear-like creatures aid our protagonists and defend their home against the Empire army. This is either the Ewoks, kung episode 6, or the Wookiee, kung episode 3. Bear-like creatures. Iba lang sila ng size. After a personal struggle, Darth Vader turns over to the other side. Hindi ko specify kung light side or dark side. Kasi kung episode 3, dark side. Kung episode 6, light side. The film ends with a funeral. It's the same. These are parallels that we see. We don't recognize it immediately when we're watching the film. But pag sinide by side natin siya, those are the common elements. Those are the parallels. We notice the similarities, okay? And then we draw more. We appreciate more the film for what it is, for how it is made. In the same manner, when we look at the different biblical stories, there are also different patterns and parallels that we could draw from different stories na pag na-detect na natin siya, pag nakita nyo na siya, ito yung mga tipo ng bagay na you cannot unsee. Then it stands out. Okay. I get that. That's what he's trying to say. That's what the author is trying to point out. I see it now. So we want to have those eyes open for what the authors are trying to communicate to us. Right? These patterns and parallels organize the way we experience the story. It gives it a certain structure. In the same way na yun yung structure ng film, when we read the different passages and see the patterns, nakikita natin yung structure ng text and help us draw more from it. How do we do this? How do we detect these patterns and parallels? Would you like to know how? Yes. Yun, nice. Again, hindi ko alam kung sabihin ko kung nag-know kayo, di ba? I want to introduce a 4-step tool for reading scripture to detect patterns and parallels. Step 1. Look for repetition. Can everybody say repetition? Look for repeated words, repeated themes, repeated settings, repeated ideas. And then you'll notice it. Step 2.
Look for repetition.
Look for repetition. Can everybody say repetition? Look for repeated themes, repeated ideas, repeated settings. Step 3. Look for repetition. Repeated words, repeated themes, repeated ideas. Step 4. Look for shifts. Look for how it changes. Pag napansin nyo na yung parehas, then you'll notice how it is different. Right? Kanina pinoint out natin lahat ng similarities sa episodes 1, 2, 3 at 4, 5, 6 ng Star Wars. Ano yung difference?
Characters.
Ano yung difference? The characters? What about the characters? The choices. 4, 5, 6 is the hero's journey of how a hero becomes a hero. Luke, called from the unknown, becomes the hero that the galaxy needed him to be. Episodes 1, 2, 3 is the villain's journey. How who was once a hero becomes the very thing that he swore to destroy. Then, even knowing all of these similarities, knowing all of these parallels, they're telling a completely different story. But they're making use of the ideas that are shared in order to tell the same story in a more compelling way, in a more poetic way, in a more beautiful way. One of the things that we want to experience, I would like for you to experience when you're reading the scriptures, is experience the beauty of how it is written, because it is written in a very beautiful way. Sobrang ganda niya. And that's why we're doing this. That's why we're doing this. So, sample na natin. Let's talk about Joseph. Old Testament Joseph, ha? Clarification. Ano yung kwento ni Old Testament Joseph? Joseph is someone that we find in the book of Genesis, toward the end. Okay, yung latter part ng 30s, mga chapter 38, I believe, all the way until Genesis chapter 50. So mahaba. Those are 12 chapters. We're not going to go through the entire 12 chapters today due to a lack of time. But I would like to bring you at least to trace some of the passages as the story is being told and to make observations and to demonstrate what it looks like to do this. To look for repetition and to look for shifts. For us to do that, it's important for us to know what the story is so far. So bago yung kwento ni Joseph, just in the book of Genesis, we begin with the story of Adam and Eve, the story of creation, where God creates the heavens and the earth, everything that is above and everything that is below. He separates the seas from the dry land. The waters above, the waters below, and He fills them all. And on the sixth day, He creates human beings. Adam and Eve. On the seventh day, He rests. Adam and Eve were entrusted with the responsibility to partner with God. Can everybody say partner? That's why they were placed in a garden. A garden is a place of partnership. Diba? What's the difference between a forest and a garden? You don't need to take care of the forest. They were placed in a garden, right? The garden is an ideal place of partnership, full of potential, and God invited Adam and Eve to become His image bearers. They were made in the image of God. They had this partnership role. However, they failed, right? They disobeyed God. They listened to the serpent instead. And because of this, the fallen world enters in. Okay, they were kicked out of the garden. They had kids, Cain and Abel. Ano nangyari kay Cain and Abel? Nagpatayan sila. Abel was giving offerings, and so was Cain, right? Abel was a herder. Cain was a farmer. Mas nagustuhan ni Lord yung sacrifices ni Abel, yung lamb, compared dun sa sacrifices ni Cain na vegetables. And that shows us that being vegetarian is not biblical. Joke lang. Gusto ni Lord meat. Okay. So, no, that's not what it shows us. What we see, napatawa ko kayo kasi baka naantok na tayo eh. What we see, wala ako sarili kong thought, is comparison. Envy enters in. Cain looks at the sacrifice of his brother. God warns Cain, okay, mag-ingat ka, okay, hindi dapat ganyan. You can do it, you can do better. What does Cain do? Kills his brother. And so after that, Cain forms a city. Things got bad. There was a big flood. Noah. There was a tall tower, Babel. As you can see, very ano na to, no? Shortcut na to. After the big tower, we are introduced to Abraham. Okay, can everybody say Abraham? Abraham was meant to be the do-over, right? Everyone, the entire humanity were lost. God wanted to bring them back. Because God wanted to bring everyone back, what does He do? He calls one person who was supposed to be the bearer of blessing to all. God will bless this one person so that this one person could reach the many. Yan ang modus ni Lord. Okay? That's the story of Abraham. Abraham, sometimes he was obedient, other times not so much. But in the end, he was brought to the land that God wanted to bring him to. He had a family just as God promised him. Okay, few generations later, we are introduced to Jacob. Can everybody say Jacob? So si Jacob and Esau are the grandchildren of Abraham. Ano nangyari kay Jacob and Esau? Away sila. Hindi rin sila okay. Right? And Jacob was the deceiver. Niloloko niya si Esau. Lagi niyang tinatry i-one-up, isahan. Okay? He was trying to cheat his brother all the time. That's the story so far. And Joseph was one of the sons of Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons with 4 different women. Yun. Nag-away-away sila. So, don't have 4 different women. What we see in the story of Joseph is he was favored by his father, Jacob. Siya lang yung may coat. Technicolor dream ko. Okay, because of this, his brothers hated him, except for the youngest. And because of this, he was sold into slavery. Papatayin dapat siya, pero nagbago isip nila last minute. Binenta siya to Egypt. And there, a lot of things happened to him. He worked as a slave. There was even a point when he was imprisoned. But what we see in the story of Jacob of Joseph rather, over and over is that he was faithful to the Lord and the Lord blessed him. The Lord blessed his work. And because of that, because of the Lord's presence in his life, even though he was put in these different circumstances na mahirap, he would always rise up. He would always meet the favor of God, receive the blessing of God in these very difficult situations until near the very end, he was put in a position of authority na-recognize nung Egyptian Pharaoh, their king basically at the time, yung potential ni Joseph at yung laki ng tulong na nagagawa ni Joseph, and that he was placed in this position of authority second only to the Pharaoh himself. Because of this, Joseph, during the time of famine, nung nagkaroon ng 7 years na walang pagkain, bagsak ang stock market, Joseph gets stock market kasi yung yan. Joseph, because of the favor God bestowed upon him, was able to bless his brothers, the exact same people who sold him to slavery. That's the story of Joseph. What we're going to do is we're going to want to look at specific passages. Let's trace through this story and let's make some observations along the way. Knowing what we've talked about kanina, okay, about patterns and parallels and things to notice and so on, pag-usapan natin. Okay, Genesis chapter 37 verses 2 to 4. This is the story of the descendants of Jacob. Dito tayo na-introduce kay Joseph. Joseph was 17 years old and tended the flocks with his brothers. He was young and stayed with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, the wives of his father. Now, Joseph told his father bad reports about them. Sumbongero siya. Israel is also Jacob, his other name. Israel loved Joseph more than all his other sons because he was the son of his old age, and he had a long tunic made for him. His brothers, seeing that their father loved him most of all his sons, hated him and could not speak peaceably with him. Let's make some observations. Israel loved Joseph more than his brothers. His brothers hated him because of this. Where else do we see this pattern? In Cain and Abel. We see this pattern in Cain and Abel. Sibling rivalry. Anong ginawa ni Cain? Oh, the story of Cain and Abel, before we talk about it. Cain and Abel, is that a good story or a bad story? It's a bad story. Bad things happen. Right? So anong ginawa ni Cain because of his envy toward his brother who was favored more by the father? Cain killed. Yeah, he murdered his brother. Okay, so murder. Keep that in mind. Don't keep that in mind. The idea of murder. Okay. Where else do we see sibling rivalry in the story of Genesis? Jacob and Esau. Anong ginawa nila? So si Cain and Abel, pinatay ni Cain si Abel. Jacob and Esau, anong ginawa nila sa isa't isa? Jacob deceived his brother and he deceived his father. So what we see, this pattern of sibling rivalry brings about murder and deception. So we already know that coming in. Murder, deception, sibling rivalry. Alam na natin yan. Ngayon, puntahan natin yung story ni Cain. Genesis chapter 4, verses 6 to 9. So balik tayo. So umpisa ulit. Cain and Abel. The Lord therefore said to Cain, so this is after God favored Abel's offering over Cain. Why are you angry and why has your countenance fallen? If you do what is right, will you not be able to hold up your head? But if you do what is wrong, sin is crouching at your door. It seeks to dominate you, but you can overcome it. Cain said to his brother Abel, let us go out into the fields. While they were walking in the fields, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord asked Cain, where is Abel, your brother? He answered, I do not know. Am I to be my brother's keeper? Sin is crouching at your door. I want to focus on this. The word that was used, the original Hebrew word that was used for this, is the kind of verb that you use for animals. Ready to pounce, ready to attack, savoring the moment, crouching at your doorstep. Yun, di ba? Ang mga lions, bago sila mag-pounce, they crouch. Di ba? Mga baba sila. Into the grass, para hindi sila makita. Where does Cain bring Abel? Into the fields, into the grass, kung saan hindi sila makikita. A lion is one predator that does that. What is another predator that does that? Crouches into the fields and attacks. Snake. Where else do we see a snake in the scriptures? Oh, yeah. In the chapter before with Adam and Eve, they were deceived by a serpent, a snake. Now you see Cain. So kay Adam and Eve, they were deceived by the serpent. Kay Cain and Abel, what we see is that Cain is now acting like a serpent. Nagiging siya na yung problema. Diba? The evil was coming from within. It is no longer a voice from outside. We see this in the story of Cain. Cain was becoming like an animal. Hayop siya. Sabi nga ng mga teleserye natin, hayop siya. Balikan natin si Joseph. Are you still following? Yes. Is this helpful? Okay, balikan natin si Joseph. Knowing this information, balikan natin si Joseph. So, diba, they were plotting to kill his brother. Genesis 37, 18, 20. They saw him from a distance, and before he could draw close to them, they plotted to put him to death. You know? They said to one another, here comes the dreamer. Come, let us kill him. Dahil nasa isip na natin si Cain and Abel, it's not surprising anymore. Murder. Makes sense. Sibling rivalry, murder. And throw him in some cistern. We will say, a wild animal devoured him, then we will see what becomes of his dreams. Wait lang. Sibling rivalry, murder. Ano ba yung isa? Deception. Deception. We're gonna pretend that we didn't kill him. A wild animal killed him. A wild animal? Oh, just like Cain, just like the serpent, just like sin crouching at the doorstep of Cain, a wild animal. Now they were also acting like wild animals. Murder and deceit. It's the same pattern. We see it. Sige, let's continue reading. Verses 23 to 25. So medyo nag-jump ng konti. When Joseph reached his brothers, they stripped him of his tunic, the long tunic that he wore, yung binigay sa kanya. They took him and cast him into a dry cistern. They then sat down to eat. When they looked up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites from Gilead with camels laden with gums, balm, and myrrh. It was carrying these things to Egypt. So this is the part of the story na nagbago na yung isip ng brothers. Okay, we don't want to kill him anymore. We just want to sell him to the Egyptians. Okay? Kasi pag binatay natin siya, patay lang siya. Pag binenta natin siya, may konting kita tayo. And there were two brothers at least who were trying to protect Joseph, trying to save Joseph, but they failed. And so they decided to sell Joseph instead, but still pretend that Joseph was killed. Okay? So nagkukunwari pa rin sila dun sa tatay nilang si Jacob. Okay, I underlined the word Egypt. Egypt. Is Egypt, according to the Bible, a place where good things happen? Or is Egypt a place where bad things happen? Bad things. Like what? Like slavery. Where do we read that story? Exodus, which comes after Genesis. So, nakita niyo yun? Wala pa tayo sa Exodus. May mga na i-import na tayong ideas from Exodus. Right? Because the Bible is meditation literature, which means that it's meant to be read over and over and over, and the more you read it, the more you get out of it. Now you begin to connect not just the stories that happened before, which what we've been doing, you also begin to connect the stories that will happen after. Egypt, bad place. Dun sila na enslaved. But there's also something that happens in Egypt before this. You see the story of Abraham. When Abraham was called by God, sabi ni Lord, go from your father's household, from your family, and go to this land that I promise you. But along the way, Abraham encountered famine. Okay, walang tumutubo dito. What does Abraham do? Instead of going to that land, Abraham went to Egypt. And bad things happened in Egypt. In Egypt was the place where his wife was almost taken by another person, the king, the pharaoh, at the time. Why? Because Abraham lied. He deceived. Something that happened before. Deception. Okay. It's connecting. Right? What else happened? Because of that, because of Abraham's deception, God sent plagues to Egypt. God sent plagues to Egypt. Hindi ba nangyari din yun sa Exodus? Nangyari na siya before Exodus. Hyperlinks, parallels. We're connecting the story. Okay. Chapter 39. Still with me? Yes. Great. 39 verse 1. When Joseph was brought down to Egypt, Potiphar, a counselor of Pharaoh and the commander of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. So Potiphar is the name of the guy who bought Joseph. So Joseph started working for Potiphar. And then something happens. Okay? In the following verses, it says, the Lord was with Joseph and he prospered. He remained in the house of the Egyptian, his master, si Potiphar. His master realized that the Lord was with him and that whatever he undertook prospered. Thus, Joseph found favor with him and became his personal attendant. Potiphar even placed him in charge of his household, and he entrusted him with all his possessions. From the moment that he was made overseer and entrusted with his possessions, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph, and the blessing of the Lord was upon all that Potiphar had, whether in the house or out in the fields. So in-underline ko na yung mga paulit-ulit na elements. The Lord was with Joseph, the Lord was with him. The Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian. Why? Because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was upon what Potiphar had. Why? Because of Joseph. Blessing was following Joseph. Blessing was following Joseph. Why? Because the Lord was with Joseph. Now we begin to make new connections. If the Lord is with you, then you're also carrying blessing. Where else do we see that? Of someone being chosen by the Lord to carry blessing. Abraham. So balik tayo kay Abraham. Okay? Babalik tayo ulit. Genesis chapter 12. The call of Abraham. The Lord said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and the house of your father, and go to the land which I will lead you. I will make of you a great people, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will become a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who curse you. And through you, all the nations on the earth shall be blessed. Blessed, blessed, blessed. Ulit-ulit. In modern literary methods, usually you don't want to repeat a word too much, right? You look for synonyms. Diba? From my view, I saw that when I looked upon, we use different words for the same thing, right? The scriptures is not like that. The scriptures, when the authors want to emphasize a certain idea, a certain thought, they make use of the repeated word again and again. They use the same word deliberately. Until you get to the point na sometimes when you're reading a completely different story and then you encounter that word, that just one word na paulit-ulit sa isang part, maaalala mo yung kabilang part na, itong portion na to, paulit-ulit yung blessing, 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 blessing. Kasi nakita mo rin siya dito. You connect these different pieces together. So in the story of Abraham, Abraham was called to represent God so that he could bless the nations, like what we said earlier. Abraham was meant to be the carrier of blessing to the people around him. What was Joseph doing? He was becoming the carrier of blessing to the people around him. So we see something that was promised to Abraham coming into fulfillment in the time of Joseph. I will bless those who bless you. Okay, because of this, balik tayo kay Joseph. 39 verse 6. Because of this, Potiphar entrusted Joseph with all that he had, and he did not concern himself with anything other than the food he ate. Sobrang bilib sa kanya si Potiphar. Alam mo, ang galing-galing mo. Ikaw na lang gumawa ng lahat. Ganun. Yung iba sa atin, ayaw naririnig yan sa trabaho, di ba? Sabi na supervisor, ang galing, ikaw na gumawa ng lahat. But for him, it was a good thing because he was a slave. But now he was given authority. Authority. Something that we will see happen again later. Unfortunately, things did not go well forever. Shortly after, we see the next problem that Joseph encounters. So si Potiphar had a wife. And the wife of Potiphar wanted Joseph to lie with her. Pogi si Joseph eh. And Joseph did not want that. No, ayoko. I am too faithful to the Lord. Okay, and I don't want to betray my master. So what happens? Potiphar forces Joseph. Joseph runs away, and then he was framed. Okay, sinampahan siya ng fake allegations, basically. One day, he entered the house to do his work, but none of the servants was around. Pinauwi nung wife ni Potiphar yung mga kasambahay para solo niya. Okay, she took hold of his tunic, saying, "Sleep with me." But he left his tunic in her hands and ran out of the house. Wait. After this encounter, Joseph left his tunic. When was the last time this happened? Na nawalan ng damit si Joseph? When he was beaten up by his brothers and sold to slavery. Now we see the same thing happening. Joseph, nawalan na naman siya ng damit. Kawawa naman to si Joseph. Laging inuubaran. My goodness. Okay, so, baka malaki rin katawan niya, no? So, Joseph lost his tunic once again. He was attacked once again. He was taken as a prisoner because of that. He was sold as a slave. And that's exactly what happens again. So, naiwan niya yung damit niya, or well, hinatak sa kanya yung damit niya. And then, he was framed, and a little after this, he was put into prison. Unjustly. Walang ginagawang masama si Joseph. Imagine mo yun. And because of that, he lost everything a second time. But, knowing what we know about Joseph, what happens next? The last time this happened to Joseph, sabi the Lord was with him. And because the Lord was with him, he brought blessing to the house of his master. Now he was put in prison. And the next thing we read, but the Lord was with Joseph. Dahil binasa yung line na yan, now napo-form na yung expectation. Last time na sinabing the Lord was with Joseph, Joseph prospered the house of Potiphar. Now, he was imprisoned and it says, the Lord was with Joseph. Before reading the rest of the passage, what do we begin to expect? We expect that
God will bless him.
God will bless him. But not just him, also the people around him. And for some reason, the last time, that became the source of his redemption. This time, it's the same. He showed him kindness and caused him to find favor with the chief jailer. Gusto siya nung boss niya, just like Potiphar. The chief jailer entrusted all the prisoners to Joseph. Binigyan na naman siya ng trabaho. Nakakulong na nga, binibigyan pa ng trabaho. whatever whatever had to be done there, he did it. He was faithful. The chief jailer did not have to worry about any of those things that were entrusted to Joseph, just like Potiphar. Sobrang galing nitong tao to. Ikaw na gumawa ng trabaho ko. Parang hindi good news yun para sa atin. For, ayan na, binanatan na naman tayo ng isang the Lord was with him and made whatever he did prosper. Dahil na-build na yung connection between the Lord was with him and blessing, notice, this passage did not even have to mention the word blessing.
That's right.
We just thought of it right away. The Lord was with him, and so he was blessed. It's connecting together. Yeah, the puzzle pieces are falling into place. And like I said, we were not gonna go through the entire story for the sake of time. What we know from Joseph is that he was faithful to the Lord even while he was in prison. Because of this, he was given authority once again. Okay? There was, he met these two people in jail that he helped as well. And later on, sabi niya, okay, I'm gonna help you. They were struggling with their dreams, right? And Joseph knew something about dreams. So, kaya si Joseph the dreamer, he helped them interpret their dreams. And then sabi niya dun sa isa, you're gonna prosper. Sabi niya dun sa isa, you're gonna die. Kawawa naman yung isa, namatay siya. Totoo nga. So, at least accurate si Joseph. And yung isang guy na sabi niya, you're gonna prosper, you're gonna find your place back in the palace, did find his place back in the palace. The only request of Joseph is, remember me. Parang si Mama Coco, remember me. But he was forgotten. He was forgotten. Later, at the right time, he was remembered during the time when the Pharaoh was having struggles with his own dreams. And Joseph being remembered by the guy who was exalted, who came from prison. Joseph was brought up before the Pharaoh, interpreted the Pharaoh's dreams, laid out a complete plan of what we could do. He predicted 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. Sabi niya, gamitin natin itong 7 years na to para mag-imbak, mag-ipon, para pag dumating yung 7 years of famine, we will have enough for us, but we can also use it to trade with others. Sobrang bilib ni Pharaoh. Anong sabi ni Pharaoh? Ang galing-galing mo, ikaw na lang gumawa ng trabaho. Pangatlong beses na, sobrang galing ni Joseph. Ayaw na magtrabaho ng boss niya. Walang iya. So, because of this, Joseph finds himself again in a position of authority. And that's when he encountered his brothers once again. And after a period of testing, so tinest niya muna yung brothers niya, pinagtripan niya muna. So loko yung mga yan eh. So he tested his brothers several times to see if they changed, if they could be trusted once again before he revealed himself. And then because of him, his brothers were blessed. Because of one person, the many were blessed. Just like Abraham. And just like Adam and Eve. Because Joseph partnered with the Lord. The garden bore fruit. One of them was, they were so impressed. Pharaoh said to his ministers, could we find another man like this in whom one finds the Spirit of God? Spirit of God. Spirit of God. Where else do we see that? We see that in the very beginning of the scriptures. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and barren, and darkness covered the abyss, while the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. The Spirit of God is what introduced order from chaos, what introduced life from death, what introduced plenty from nothing. And Joseph did the same as an image of God. And because of this, Joseph was able to bless not just his neighbor, but also the very people he once considered his enemies. Or at least the people who considered him their enemies. So, wala mo siya ginagawa eh. Bad report. No, yun. Sumbongero siya. So sa mga magkakapatid dito, yung susumbong yung mga kapatid nyo, sige kayo. Makibenta kayo sa Egypt. And that's the story of Joseph. Before we wrap up, okay, we have 9 minutes. Honorable mentions, okay? I expected na hindi natin madadaanan yung buong kwento ni Joseph, so I prepared some honorable mentions. Okay, number 1, the importance of remembering and recognizing. The prisoner that Joseph helped forgot him. Forgot him. The brothers, nung nakita ulit sila ni Joseph, nung mayaman na si Joseph, did not recognize him. It's the same. Things worked out when he was remembered. Joseph was remembered by the former prisoner and he was exalted. Diba? His brothers recognized him when he revealed himself and they were brought in. So mahalaga yung remembering and recognizing. The next time that we see this happen, that they failed to remember, was in Exodus. When it said that the Pharaoh at the time, years later, did not recognize or remember Joseph. That's why they were enslaved in Egypt. Honorable mention number 2. Joseph tests his older brothers by putting in line his youngest brother. Diba? Tinignan niya, anong gagawin nila rin sa youngest brother? Kasi last time, ako yung binenta nila eh. So he was testing them. His test was based upon what happened to him, what his brothers did to him. There was a reason behind it. Last time, number 3, the entire family goes to Egypt, setting up the next conflict. Egypt, good place, bad place? Exactly, bad place. It ends with Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. This is the defining verse of the entire book of Genesis. And this is Joseph speaking to his brothers. You intended to do evil to me, but God decided to make it serve a good, to fulfill that which today has come true, to keep alive a numerous people, to give life to many. You intended harm, but God used it for good. You can use this passage and read the story of Adam and Eve with this in mind. Use this passage and read the story of Cain and Abel with this in mind. The story of Abraham with this in mind. That's the story of Joseph. Kanina, I said that nag-activity tayo na guess the Star Wars movie. I want to do something again. This is called Guess the Bible Story. There was a man who was imperfect but strived to remain righteous. He was faithful to the Lord and he remained chaste. He found himself unwillingly residing in Egypt for many years. He was brought there by dire, life-threatening events caused by man's envy. But God continued to speak to him and reveal his will to him through dreams. God's favor and presence remained with him. Finally, after all of this, he returns to his people, bringing life-giving food to all who were in need. Who's this guy? Joseph? Which Joseph? Both Josephs. It's both Josephs. Joseph the Dreamer. Ayun. So para naman hindi ma-disappoint yung mga pumunta dito, gusto marinig yung New Testament Joseph, di ba? Sana nabawi natin, no? He was faithful to the Lord and he remained chaste. Right? Found himself unwillingly residing in Egypt for many years, brought there by dire, life-threatening events. Joseph was sold as a slave. The other Joseph had to run away because Herod was hunting his son, caused by man's envy. God continued to speak to him and reveal his will to him through dreams. God speaks to Joseph of the Old Testament through dreams, and he speaks to Joseph of the New Testament through dreams. He had 2 dreams sa New Testament. We just remember the one. Diba? Joseph of the New Testament had 2 dreams. In the start, Joseph of the New Testament had 2 dreams. Joseph of the Old Testament began with 2 dreams, and he interpreted 2 dreams. And then, pagdating niya kay Pharaoh, he interpreted 2 stages of the same dream. 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. 2 dreams. Paulit-ulit. God's favor and presence remained with him. Finally, after all this, he returns to his people. Joseph returns to his brothers. Joseph the old returns to his brothers. Joseph the new returns to Nazareth, bringing life-giving food, also known as the bread of life. The Bible is a profound work of ancient literature, and it would benefit us much to read it as such, and for us to allow ourselves to experience the beauty and the wonder of God's Word. And an extension with that, allow ourselves to experience the beauty and wonder of who Jesus is. And we're gonna continue that. Marami pang ibang examples that will be given throughout the scope of this Bible Lab. After this session, we're gonna talk about Jonah. Also a very profound story. Tomorrow, meron ding session about poetry, and then followed by a panel talking about using scripture as worship. And we will wrap this up tomorrow with a study through the entire Gospel of John. In other words, I too am convincing you to stay here. Tignan natin. So, that would be nice. If you want to connect further, my podcast, Not So Secular. So, yun. Yun. Thank you very much. And please pray for me. God bless.
Again, let's give a big hand to Brother Mon Reyes. Thank you, bro. I love the 4 steps.